there's nothing as fantastic as the buzz of engaged conversation, except maybe the hug that precedes it. Couple of things. If you have ideas for engaging questions that you think, oh my gosh, perhaps it's too political and we won't take it on for whatever reason, what have you, please think of us, because we will. So my cell phone is on my signature of every email. I'm good at texting, but we are in this 100%. So please share your thoughts and ideas, because that's part of what we're here for. And I love it. I went Navy and Aviva went Brazil. Okay. So our next speaker, I remembered, our next speaker is Wanda Korn. And for me, this is a huge emotional deal, because I love her work and I love the example of engaged warmth that she has toward her students, toward things that are related, if you will, to, there was an allusion made to, quote, a glut of Americanists. But realize, when you go to graduate school in American studies or American art, whatever it is, you are not learning to be a plumber. You are developing a set of skills, an ability to question, an ability to think, an ability to adapt. And those skills and those abilities are useful in any number of contexts. And if you wish, you can still function as a scholar, whatever that exactly means now, or a cultural critic. So please, think more broadly about what it is that, we are collectively doing in terms of people coming along in the field, and also as there are new media and new ways of communicating, where we need people who can actually employ certain set of skills in a new landscape. Anyway, that's just my pitch for versatility, which I profoundly believe in. So our next speaker is Wanda Korn. And so I'm going to be hyper personal. We had a discussion last night about when was the first time she spoke. So I am going to show you all something. 1998. It was called Radical Departures, and it actually sparked a lot of fracas over Fauvism. But at that time, I'm just trying to find the entry that we wrote on Wanda. This also included an extra day, which we're still big on, that addressed issues of conservation. Just looking to see. Yes. Okay. Among other publications, The Great American Thing, Transatlantic Modernism and National Identity. So that book, and I confess I was a bit tired because my intention was actually to bring my copy of that book, because there was a book signing for that book at Herschel and Adler, and when they were on 70th Street. And my father was my date. And we went to that book signing, and by that point we had kind of agreed, okay, well, we're both buying a lot of the same books, so maybe one will get this and one will get that. We arrive at this thing. My father says, my father was from Texas, 256 people in the town he was born in, and he said, I have to have my own copy. So we each have copies that were purchased at that book signing, and Mom still has Daddy's copy. I have mine. Anyway, the work Wanda has done for the scholarly work, or whatever you want to call it, thoughtful, engaging work about American culture is something that Wanda has done, and we're all indebted. But there's another thing, which is warmth, embrace, and creation of community. And I remember when I was a Smithsonian Fellow, one of my colleagues had actually been married at Wanda's home. Or Wanda and Joe's home. So, this kind of, or the commitment to artists' houses, artists' residences, and their importance. I mean, all of this really adds up to something that is far more than the individual parts. So, if I can be perhaps a tad off the professional kilter that one is meant to always observe, it is with love and respect that I welcome her. I'm so happy that she's here. And of course, the title of her talk is The Couple with the Pitchfork. And this is a project she's been engaged in for a really long time. So I can't wait to hear this first talk about it. Anyway, welcome, Wanda.
For your dad. I feel like I should be really stern and not very generous today. But anyway, that was a lovely introduction. Thank you. And thank you, Lisa, for 30 years of invitations. Actually, it turns out it's 28 for me, because we did a little research, and that program was 1998. You didn't mention that.
I'm sorry about that.
And my co-conspirator, Suzanne, who will follow me, beat me by a year, it turns out. But I can't say I've done all 30, but a good number of them. Anyway, and this has always been the most generous of audiences and engaged. And so it's always lovely to, as I will be doing today, to try out some ideas. Are we up? Yes, okay. In 1979, an art cartoon by Charles Addams ran on the pages of The New Yorker. The scene is set in a country villa where people have gathered for a social occasion. Every guest is drawn from a famous work of art. In the very center, and I don't have a pointer, so I hope you can see, in the very center is the man and woman I'm going to talk with you about today, surrounded by people like the Mona Lisa, a laundress by Degas, Gainsborough's Blue Boy, and so on. The only other American in the room is Whistler's mother on the right edge. Outside the door, there is a Van Gogh cypress tree. The hostess says to the man in striped pants and a jacket, "I think you know everybody." Given the paintings on the wall, they appear to be, like some of you, art collectors. Every person in this room is what today I would call, in any case, an art icon. That is, each one of them is a hand-drawn schematic, a little Addams shorthand reference to a celebrity work of art that readers of New Yorker would presumably recognize, perhaps instantly recognize. It might remind them of their art history identification quizzes from college. Art icons are not reproductions like what you see on the screen right now. They are rather redactions of works of art, simplifications, formulaic images, just like the little icons on your computer, you know, the little image of a folder or the little microphone that you push to get to a complicated task. Though there are an infinite number of paintings and sculptures out there in the world, only a few dozen have become excessively popular internationally. We really don't understand very well at all why one work of art enters into the hurly-burly of contemporary life as a pop icon, while others stay quietly in their museums and in textbooks. But as these three examples suggest, one thing they have in common is that they are very easy to remember and to redact. We'll get a little bit to that later. You can repeat them very easily if you're an outsider thinking about them. For years, art historians have ranted against the damages of iconization that they impose upon the original work of art, blaming a variety of forces, commodification, capitalism, commercialism, for cheapening works of art. And many, if not most, art historians have wanted nothing to do with the street culture that keeps art icons in circulation. But slowly the tides are turning. Case studies written by art historians are beginning to emerge that study the complex processes and histories that lay behind the select works of art that have had this very peculiar fate of being recognized around the globe. Studies of Whistler's mother, Hokusai's wave, and Kahlo's self-portraits have each moved the needle a notch towards a better understanding of how and why particular works of art go iconic. And this October, I am making my own contribution to icon studies with a new book from Princeton Press. And today I'm giving you, in effect, my first book talk. And I'm happy to present it in honor of Lisa and the 30th anniversary of Initiatives in Art and Culture. And also I'm going to thank Suzanne, my co-conspirator, who's given me a little bit more time than I was awarded because she said I could do it. In this study, I argued that the couple has had two distinctly different lives. The first is a unique material object in the museum, and the second is an iconic image in the world at large. The first half of my book is dedicated to the life of the painting, and the second half is dedicated to the couple's life on the streets. The artist has a lot to do with the first life. The workings of culture control the second. What I want to do today, and it was hard to decide, but I'm going to take a quick look at the couple's first life as a painting, then a much deeper dive into the far less known second life, the couple as icon. Finally, at the end, I'm going to say a few words about how this particular image of a man and woman found its way into a Charles Addams cartoon, and not another couple. Life one begins at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1930. The most prestigious museum and art school. They are combined, and they still are today, the School of Art at the Art Institute and the museum. They're the most prestigious in the region, in the Midwest, but of course they're nationally known. Grant Wood was from Iowa, but he had spent a little time in Chicago as an arts and crafts artisan, and he had taken a few courses at the School of the Art Institute. This is all in the late teens and into the 20s. So he knew well that every year at the Art Institute, the annual happened. This was a highly acclaimed exhibition of contemporary painting and sculpture by living artists that attracted both established and aspiring young artists. Submissions were made by artists, and then a jury would review sometimes up to over 1,000 works and then choose some 200 to 300 of them for exhibition. In the 1920s, Grant Wood was a plein air landscapist, following in the footsteps of the Impressionists, and he never showed this kind of work in the annual. In fact, we don't really know whether he ever tried to submit paintings like these for review, but if he did, the jury had not accepted them. And as it so happens, the work on the left, I believe you can see in tomorrow's art show, if I'm not mistaken. It happens to be in New York right now, and that's a self-portrait of the young artist doing one of his plein air paintings. I'm not going to spend too much time on them, but let me just say that there's some 300 to 400 of these works. We're getting them cataloged. We're doing a catalog raisonné now at the University of Iowa, and so someday we'll know a lot more about stage one, if you will, or life one of Grant Wood's work. It's a job that's been needed to be done for a very long time. But in 1930, something changed. Wood had been battling something like a midlife crisis, if I can call it that, and had decided to abandon Impressionism and invent a brand new style and artist identity as a Midwesterner. He submitted 2 of his very first paintings. He had only done 4 or 5 of them at this new hyper-realist style to the 43rd annual exhibition of that year. And to his joy, the jury accepted both of them. They were both oils on, and he liked his favorite surface was masonite. The couple were life-size, 30 inches high, 25 wide. Both, we might say, of the men and women are in our face, pushed to the front edge in a tightly compressed composition that knits together 4 elements: a pitchfork, a man, a woman, and a wooden framed house with a tall neo-Gothic window in its gable that hangs between them. It's a highly engineered composition, painted in a style Wood had come up with after studying old masters and Northern Renaissance masters like Memling and Dürer. We'll hear a little bit more about that in Suzanne's paper. And then he was also interrogating at the same time features from Midwestern past history, material culture things. He enjoyed antiques like vintage daguerreotypes and tintype photographs, and was particularly fond of some of the stylizations in blue willow china that had come out to the frontier, often with families traveling from the East. The jury decided, even though they knew nothing of this artist, he was simply not known in Chicago at the time, that they decided to give American Gothic one of the smallest prizes of the year, but nevertheless, it was a prize of $300. And here's what happened. The day before the exhibition opened, C.J. Bullitt, the lead art critic in the Chicago Press, came out with his review of the exhibition, and it was called American Normalcy Displayed in Annual Exhibition. He was a very opinionated critic, and he labeled the show, this is a quote, a tepid, spineless affair mirroring the listlessness of the current art scene. The new normal, he said, is a rather high grade of mediocrity. But Bullitt's unhappiness then brightened, and he singled out the one painting that he said made him glad to be alive in Chicago in 1930. The biggest kick of the show came of all places, Cedar Rapids, not New York, not Chicago. Bullitt looked to Paris for an analog to what he was seeing in Wood's work. To his eye, he thought Wood to be an American Henri Rousseau, an artist I'm sure you all know. Wood, he said, was not a mere imitator of Rousseau, but like him, was primitive, naive in outlook. Rousseau used French motifs. Wood used American ones, and he used 3 big adjectives. American Gothic, he said, was quaint, humorous, and then in capital letters, all caps, American. Bullitt went on to make a brief mention of Stone City as another application of the primitive, registering that it too was not a school of Paris, but a Midwestern American landscape. For Bullitt, the painting's Americanness was a good thing. Another quote, "We don't have to paint American landscapes such as Cézanne or Claude Monet painting the French fields and hills. That the couple in the landscape in Wood's work were American in both type and detail excited him, and he went overboard in his star-billing praise. What followed was a firestorm of critical interest in this offbeat painting. The painting was illustrated in newspaper reviews and particularly in rotogravure sections, which is what you have here, 2 of those, which were weekly weekly accounts of news of all sorts, and art being part of it. I'll let you kind of pick your way through, but you can see prominently where the American Gothic is featured. The painting, interestingly enough, because of its tight realism, it read extremely well on the black and white page. It did not need color to make it work. And to that point, there's another work of art in the one to the left, just kitty corner diagonally right, of a woman in a chair, which is a painting. And you can see how that definitely reads as a painting, whereas American Gothic, you might stumble as to know whether it was a photograph or a painted work. The Friends of American Art at the Art Institute immediately bought the painting for the museum's permanent collection. Another $300, but there was somehow a commission, so only $240 of that got to the artist. And the artist would never again take it home and have it in his studio. He was, of course, over the moon. He was known locally in Iowa, where he showed in the state fair and won prizes there in the last couple of years before this happened, but not beyond. Furthermore, he had only made 4 or 5 paintings in this new style, and have one of them get so much fuss and acclaim was a dream come true. His overnight success, however, also gave him problems. He had no backlog, no supply of paintings to support his fame, just 400 plus impressionist paintings that no one was interested in. He had to get to work to prove he was not just a flash in the pan. Furthermore, Wood was unsettled that every single person who wrote about the painting described it the same way. It was a farmer and his wife standing in front of their little farmhouse. In his mind, he had painted an unmarried spinster daughter living with her father. And the spinster daughter, I do a big spin on that in my book, but it was a popular theme. So it's not as if he's inventing this, he's picking up on it and using something that had been around for some decades, actually. He had chosen very carefully his 30-year-old sister, whom you see here in the only photograph we have of the 2 models together, which was at Grant Wood's death in 1942. But at the time, 12 years earlier, his sister Nan was 30 years old. She was married. And he asked her, she had modeled for him before, to model for the spinster role. And then he had asked his dentist, the 62-year-old Dr. McKeeby, to stand in for the father. He thought of them not as farmers, but as small-town village folk, like those that Sinclair Lewis wrote about in Main Street in Babbitt. They were the kind of people he had grown up with knowing as an Iowan farm kid. He was surprised that so many critics thought he was making fun of and satirizing the narrow-minded rubes living in the American Bible Belt. I don't have time to develop these differences here, but I do in my book. And this is really one of the best examples in the history of art of how an artist's intentions can differ wildly from the public's reception of a painting. The artist intends or paints one thing, narrates the story he thinks he's telling, the audience in this case sees another. It is, in fact, I argue, what people see in American Gothic that has determined its fame, not the artist's originating idea. I call American Gothic Wood's accidental masterpiece. What Wood could never really comprehend about all the fuss around this painting was that he had tapped into a visual formulation of coupleness that is so deeply ingrained in world cultures, most especially in photographs of married couples, that it was all but impossible for viewers to see the man and woman the way he intended unless he had given us a lot more information. Everyone across modern cultures has grown up learning that an image of a man and woman standing close to one another and looking out at us is that of a marriage or at least 2 people in an intimate relationship. It's a visual stereotype, a cliche that we would all agree upon, and he did not sufficiently disturb it. Furthermore, because Wood had put his people squarely in front of a house, he evoked another deeply conceited convention that everybody grows up knowing and repeating, that of a family standing closely together in front of their domicile to have their picture taken. There's no doubt in my mind that Wood, who collected Iowan antiques and loved his family's old daguerreotype and tintypes, had consciously borrowed from them when he had composed American Gothic. He had many sources, but that was one of them. He knew well that on the American frontier, itinerant photographers would go from home to home and have families pose, like they do in both of these photographs. Families would come out and pose in front of their dwellings, including even the couple in front of their sod house home in the Solomon Butcher photograph to the right. It was a visual formula everyone knew and performed. So bottom line, when American Gothic went viral, it was because it was enjoyed as a portrait of a stiff and dour farmer and wife posing in front of their house. And there was nothing the artist could say to convince people otherwise. His sister tried to set the record straight her entire life, telling people, I'm the daughter, not the wife. But she changed no one's mind. The convention won out. The painting simply, for most of us, I would say most people who are honest with themselves, doesn't cohere well as a father and daughter. But if it did, I dare say, it would not have the fame it has today. For the next 12 years, Wood painted his Iowa in his new style before dying at 50, a very young age, cancer, in 1942. He never had a similar hit again, but the extraordinary reputation and popularity of American Gothic made him an overnight wonder. And his reputation, when he died, was considerable. Newspapers around the country ran obituaries, and the Art Institute of Chicago did something they had rarely done, which is to give he was dead, but he had just died, an artist and a memorial exhibition. Wood did not live long enough to see American Gothic morph into the couple with the pitchfork, which is what I call my book, and that is what I think of as the way to describe the icon, the couple with the pitchfork. If I tell people around me very often when they ask me what I'm working on, if I tell them I'm working on American Gothic, 80% of them don't know what I'm talking about. If I tell them I'm working on a painting or an image called A Couple with a Pitchfork, I get eyes that light up. So he witnessed at least once or twice couples dressing up as the couple, such as the one on the left, which is a University of Iowa couple, because they did this for costume parties. And he would have seen Fortune magazine on the other side, on the right, suggesting that a reproduction of American Gothic be appropriated to sell, just a straight reproduction, to sell war bonds. But both of these, I would say, were one-offs. They were not yet the torrent of appropriations that began to enter mass culture in the late 50s and 60s. One such was the brief appearance of the couple here on the left in Meredith Willson's Broadway hit, The Music Man of 1958, to tell the audience that they are about to see a story in River City, a made-up city, a mythical small town in Iowa. To set the scene, two actors dressed as the couple quickly took the pose. To make sure that the audience knew who they were and recognized them as drawn from a painting, two townsmen hold a frame around them. About the same time, Pacific Bell Telephone began to use a reproduction of the painting doctored with speech bubbles. And this kind of primitivized the couple. She says, "Oh, our son calls from the city every Sunday." And he says, dials the call himself too. It was also in the 1960s when celebrity Gothics launched. There were no computers yet, but clever people figured out how to montage the heads and faces, photographs usually of the heads and faces, sometimes drawn in, of the well-known, and then somehow recreating a reproduction or simulation of the painting. Lyndon Johnson, the White House behind him, and Lady Bird, was the first American president to be Gothicized, and no president after him has been spared. In the 1960s and early 70s, as these images began to circulate outside the museum and in the streets, I was coming of age as a young art historian. Trained in European art, I was just discovering that there was something called American art. And I was fascinated that a painting as humble and unglamorous as American Gothic was being reimagined and put back into the world to do all sorts of tasks that art was not intended to do, such as sell us products, represent famous people, and make art jokes. So I began to pick them up casually and throw them into a banker box, eventually becoming a collector of American Gothic schlock and ephemera. I could be called the queen of American Gothic schlock, I think, at the moment. Today, I've amassed not just hundreds, but thousands of pieces of Gothic Chiana. It's my archive, and over the past 10 years, I have assiduously studied my holdings, as well as a couple of similar collections that I know of in Iowa. The Figge Museum, for instance, also has a very good collection of ephemera. But I've been wanting to see what can I learn if I just look at the, if you will, the afterlife and put aside the painting. So let me share a few of my discoveries. One thing I've learned is that the formation of an art icon is a process. There are moments of great invention, and there are also lots and lots of stultifying repetitions. I tend to give grades to what's in my the ephemera in my collection. I give A's and B's to the most clever and innovative, and an awful lot of F's to the bland and unimaginative. But taken as a whole, looking through these and trying to put them into some kind of historic order, they have let me uncover a 3-generation history. The pioneers, and that's what you've been looking at now from the 1960s and 70s, the expansionists of the next 2 decades, the end of the 20th century, and then the icon busters and globalists of the 21st century. Now, one hallmark of the first generation, the pioneers, is that appropriators feel beholden to the particulars of the painting, as they do in these 2 works. They repicture the couple to look like they have stepped out of the painting. They are decidedly old-fashioned, their bumpkiness underlined. On the left, Ma and Pa marvel at the Casio music calculator that allows them to press the buttons and play simple tunes. And on the right, the rustic couple have done something very adventuresome. They've gone off the farm to have a modern vacation and stay in a new hotel chain that opened in the 1970s. We all remember it probably, called Days Inn. The first appropriators used their, if you will, insular ways and country ways to sell the rest of us modern gadgets and conveniences. I call the second generation of appropriators the expansionists. In their hands, the couple, and now we're in the 80s and 90s, morphed from rusticity to urbanity and evolved into a malleable template serviceable to any group identity. In these 2 examples, the couple keep their pose, but they radically change their clothes and their attributes, becoming Reagan-era exercise-toned yuppies on the right and dressed up in formal wear to go to the opera on the left. And since we have some Minnesotans here, I might tell you that is the Minnesota opera that used them. And the byline is that you can now go to the opera and hear the opera in English. So understandable from for the country folk who might otherwise find it a very elite experience. Even in the 80s and 90s, when the couple retained, and there was plenty of retention of the traditional dress, keeping her in her apron and he in his overalls, they debumpkinized, I like to say, the couple, making them into moderns who were quite comfortable enjoying and indulging in the privileges and lifestyles of the wealthy. Sometimes they freely swapped out the pitchfork to give them new identities. In the Jewish American Gothic on the left, the man holds a menorah, and the Italian American Gothic on the right, he holds a mega-sized fork wrapped in linguine. The cameo and earrings worn by his flirtatious Italian wife are shaped like ravioli. The cameo worn by the Jewish woman, a Star of David. These variations are playful, but the bigger point here is that the new graphic designers felt free to improvise. This I take to be an important milestone, a marker that the painting had gone iconic, and the couple now have an independent life in the big wide world outside of the museum. By the 1980s, in other words, there was a painting in a museum called American Gothic, but elsewhere in the country, there was a free-floating, ever-changing image in a mass culture that I call Couple with a Pitchfork. The expansionists took other liberties. They re-racialized the whiteness of the couple, for example, creating Black, brown, and Native American Gothics. And there's a whole history of each of these that I could tell you, but just to put it in general terms, it was in this period of time when diversity and different identities began to take charge, if you will, and put themselves within these roles. And similarly, it was this generation that rejiggered the sexuality of the original couple, how heterosexual they had been, of course, turning what had been a very pronounced heterosexuality of the mother image into banner images for gay civil rights and same-sex marriage. Now to the third generation, the 21st century, and to our own times. These are the millennials, and I call them the icon busters and globalists. Millennials grew up with computers and Photoshop. In other words, not like most of us in this room. And with the spread of icons by modern communication, like the iPhone and social media. The millennials have an enormous visual vocabulary, and they have grown up from the very beginning, not only on icons from the fine arts, but on icons from pop and celebrity cultures. They do not need to know anything about art or history to be fully conversant with the Couple with a Pitchfork. They've absorbed them as stock images in print media, advertisements, board and electronic games, television, films, and especially the image-rich personal computer. So one mark of the third generation is their ease with icons and their desire to mix and mingle them to create hilarious new stories, such as the head of the American Gothic man grafted onto Arnold Schwarzenegger's movie star body type from his 1982 film, Conan the Barbarian. And the way this greeting card has it, they've placed the hybrid Superman in library stacks. And then therefore they could then call the card not Conan the Barbarian, but Conan the Librarian. One of my favorite icon busters is Barry Kite on the right, who is unusually conversant with art history. And in this note card, he has the Gothic couple surfing and swimming in Hokusai's great wave, breaking over the top of their house. Computer geeks have expanded the ranks of those in the icon industry. And I have to admit, I find it impossible today to keep up with them. Today, hundreds of electronic Gothics like these two exist solely online, usually without authorship, and they appear and disappear relentlessly. I'm sad to say, but given up trying to collect anything except when I see some that I can't stop myself from holding on to. And as I learned yesterday from Anne's paper, these are what we call born digitals. Unlike those who recreate the couple with pen and pencil or photograph models looking like the couple, those who work with Photoshop take their material directly from high-res images they find online and cut and paste with enormous skill. They start by assessing a high-quality reproduction of the mother image that is, of course, easily available online, thanks to the Art Institute, but also other places, but the Art Institute gives them a perfectly fine start point, and then they add imagery from other images. Their Gothics have a polished look all their own. They are highly illusionistic in their quotations from the painting. They're illuminated from the lit screen. And I've taken both of these off from the lit screen, and they have no texture. Their composites are generally designed to make, they are composites, and they're generally designed to make people laugh and marvel at how clever their makers have been in coming up with new fusions of iconic imagery. Most often, they float around in the ether without a maker's name attached to them. I grade them on the originality. I would give something like an A+ to the one of the pimp and prostitute on the street into the right, and maybe a B- or so on the one on the left, which is basically just getting the costume and the guns right, otherwise using the photograph of the painting, reproduction of the painting as a base. Today, many appropriators continue to use traditional media, such as etchings. As you see here, you have an etching, a collage, and an art photograph. And this is especially true from makers from other countries who have now produced in this new century far more international and global Gothics than ever before, a de-Americanizing of the icon that someday will warrant its own study. My archive has examples from other countries from as early as the 1960s, but in this century, the global numbers have soared. Artists working in other countries typically re-engineer the couple by putting them in dress with architecture and attributes peculiar to their own place, whether it be the Mexican Day of the Dead, as we see here, or Saudi Arabian farmers with their own tools and architecture and garden patch, or a Scottish couple on the far right there, protesting Trump's takeover of their town in Scotland to build a luxury golf course. Today, icon mashers also create global Gothics, as this clever designer did, for a cover of a British magazine, The Economist, to illustrate a story about Angela Merkel and Barack Obama seeking new relations with Japan. Each world leader wears fusion Euro-Asian dress, and in lieu of a dwelling, the Japanese printmaker Hokusai's iconic image of a snow-capped Mount Fuji looms behind them. So now, something of a conclusion. Lesson number one that I want to leave you with is this. In my case study, I've determined that works of art are not icons overnight. It's a drawn-out process, but it can be documented and dissected. It could be given a history. In the case of American Gothic, the first appropriations are beholden to the painting. But then as the second life develops, the umbilical cord breaks, and the icon takes on a creative life of its own and begets, if you will, its own progeny. They proliferate in such profusion that they teach the world who the couple are without the painting as an intermediary. That helps us understand what the curators at the Art Institute tell me about visitors, what they say when they come upon the painting in the museum. And this is a report the curators give me, and some of this is online. Is this the original, they will ask? They have seen so many versions of the couple with a pitchfork that they don't know where it originated. As Sarah Oler, the lead curator at Art Institute, tells me, and this is a quote from her, American Gothic has become so famous that people don't realize that it actually was and still is a painting. In their minds, it is no longer an object. To that, I would say right on. In life too, the couple became iconic all on its own as an independent image. Lesson two, I don't have time except to make a few remarks about. The history of art is filled with portraits of couples. So why, I am asked all the time, is American Gothic the cult couple? The more work everyone does on art icons, the better we're going to be able to answer a question like this. But what seems clear to me is that the answer is going to have very little to do with aesthetics and everything to do with the work's messaging. Images like Mona Lisa, The Scream, Whistler's Mother, American Gothic attract mass audiences because, as scholar Martin Kemp puts it, they carry, quote, a rich series of varied associations for very large numbers of people across time and cultures, end quote. In other words, simply put, the scream has to do with elementary fear, the Mona Lisa, her mysterious smile, Whistler's mother, an archetypal image of motherhood, and American Gothic, an archetypal couple bound to one another in an elementary relationship that has been around since Adam and Eve. And what explains the popularity of this couple, unlike so many in the world of art, I think, is the fact that at least today in our century, the popularity can be explained because they are not royalty, they're not aristocracy, they're not rich and privileged, they're not members of an elite, but of simple stock. They are regular folk, and in this country, they represent the fabled common man. Furthermore, I think this is key and perhaps hasn't been said enough, they represent a character type that the ephemera helps me understand, because when people read it, they read it the same way around the world. Everyone sees them as grim and repressed, gloomy and joyless. In other words, they're post-Freudian in character. They have a recognizable psychological repressed self. And I think that's in part what appeals to the modern imagination. It often seems key that, like the Scream, Mother, and Mona, they are easy to remember and make for easy repeats. It takes no talent to mimic them. You stand next to your mate, you pull down the corners of your mouth, you grab a kitchen fork or a garden rake, and you look straight ahead for a photograph or a selfie. Ergo, a do-it-yourself Gothic. I have hundreds of such spontaneous versions in my collection. Thanks to people who send them to me, by inviting them. It is also the case that they are recognizable in fragmentary form, and I think this is very important that we are learning by looking at a number of icons. You don't have to see the entire painting and all its parts for people to recognize the appropriation. Today, because it circulates so widely, sometimes it's just the eyes. I've even seen one with just a pitchfork standing in a field with a little house way, way, way in the distance, and we all know where it came from. It is indeed the Gothic vocabulary. This severe grimness has long been understood to be part of the painting's quintessential Americanness. From the very beginning, the couple have been called puritanical, moralizing, prim, proper, as well as being hailed, as I mentioned earlier, as the fabled American common man and as an example of the Protestant work ethic. They have been identified as American-styled farmers with industrial tools and a wooden-framed house, different in dress and locale than the European peasant. There is no doubt but the couple's New World overalls and calico apron helped launch this painting in 1930 and established its first decades of fame. To many, it seemed a quintessential American picture. Remember back to the review that I read you from 1930. But today, when the image is so easily reworked to make Italian, Russian, Israeli, Scandinavian, German Gothics, and cross-national images, the couple, like the Mona Lisa, is beginning to belong to the world. They will always retain something of their American origins, but they float today in global company. To underline this final point, let me share one final image that is on my current A+ list. I'll give you a minute. And this is again by Barry Kite, who calls these photo collages. He calls them photo collages, but in fact he does use the computer, and he calls it aberrant art. And he has a gallery which hosts his own work in Florida. In this computer-designed romp, the iconic American Gothic man is in bed with a mashup of Picasso's painted images of nude women. His boots and overalls, if you look to the lower right corner, his boots and overalls are by the bed there to the right. And then if you look at his body, that's not his body. Well, we don't know what his body looks like, but it certainly is Picasso's hairy chest. And he also has a cigarette in his hand. And like Picasso, he is smoking. Mrs. Gothic, unhappy, is outside the window by her house, and having had enough is putting a gun to one of Picasso's self-portraits. At one level, this is a hilarious commentary on the Me Too movement, but it also tells us about the international company the couple now keep. Pictures like this one, unimaginable when I began my archive, make me realize that my story is not over. Someone else has to take over and track this icon to see where it will go next. But this gives you a little bit of a peep into at least some aspects of my new work, and I hope it will present some fresh thinking about art icons and why American Gothic is one of them. Thanks. We take questions? Yeah? Or should we do it after Suzanne? I don't know. Suzanne's a great compliment to me. We have a dog and pony show, as you'll see, but totally put together by Miss Lisa, who sort of figured it all out. But anyway, Stephen.
Is there any possibility that your collection will be exhibited in some way?
Maybe on his the 100th birthday of the painting. It's a long way away as far as I'm concerned. 4 years. Yeah. The biggest problem is that the painting can't be lent. And as the museum people in the audience knows very well, even though I can see it as a show without the painting, because the icons aren't looking at the painting, the icon makers are not looking at the painting, they're looking at reproductions. So, but the world expects the original painting, so that's been a bit of a stumbling block, can I put it that way? Bob, oh, wait a minute, somebody's coming to you. Was it, Fred, did you have something? No. No, it's coming to you, or scream, just scream.
Thank you, Wanda. So one of the things you suggested in your talk is that because people have tended to see them as puritanical and moralizing and grim, do you think a lot of the satires or parodies of them, the impulse behind them is to like liberate them from that and make them more, put them in a like position of joy and happiness and make them outrageous? Do you think there's a psychology behind that of people looking at that image and going, I want you to break out of that, and so I'm going to make an image where you do that?
Well, there's certainly a thread of doing that, but it's often also quite regional. Midwesterners are more likely to do what you just suggested, I think, than Northeasterners. I can't prove that exactly without doing a little bit more work, but I think Midwesterners do see, or at least Iowans, like I know best, do see this as a self-portrait. And they're very proud of it. And they also see it as a it is a little bit of ye old Iowa, as we were talking about ye old West yesterday. But it's also, they get the sternness and the dourness, and they're happy to be happy versions of it. But I think they kind of want to keep the stereotype behind it because they feel that's in their DNA as a regional type. So that's one way to answer it. But let me go one other place maybe with your question, which is something I had to get rid of because of time. Usually that question goes more like, so do people see them as always conservative rubes from the hinterland? Are they seen as conservative right-wingers, for instance? Occasionally, but not by any means always. And that's kind of been a surprise to me. They're often seen as people who stand up for their own rights. They're militant, and they're militant for a whole variety of causes that probably a lot of people in this audience think the right causes to be, like the hippies in the 60s. I had to kind of drop that story out. But the first people to raise the pitchfork for values that were national, particularly anti-war values, anti-war protests, were basically hippie Gothics. And they wore the exact same costumes, but they were using their weapon as well, they were using their pitchfork as a weapon rather than as a tool. And then you find there's a certain reverence for the stoic quality in some images. In fact, I have a few, but very few that I would say really come from a position of conservative politics. It's usually liberal politics. But on the other hand, I'll give you an example. Pat Oliphant, one of our great newspaper cartoonists, never failed to see them anything other, well, it's not quite sure. I should never say never. I can think of one where already is an exception. But he liked to use them as standing for really hard-nosed values in this country that he did not admire. So they were often little stanchions, little icons for conservative values, and where the cartoon itself was pushing for women in Supreme Court representation and that kind of thing. So there is a position, but and probably the most conservative I have found is no longer on the web, but believe it or not, it was Jesus Christ and the Virgin Mary version. And I know that was a very conservative site by the site. And when I went back in to find it, it had gone. And that was way before the recent federal news about other people acting out. I mean, that was like maybe 2-3 years ago. But I by and large, I have very few that I could identify as coming from a very deep right, if I can put it that way, space.
Wanda,
Yeah, who's that? Sorry.
Over here.
Oh, yeah, Amanda.
I know this is probably for the next person to take over it, but it seems like this is an image that AI is going to run with, and
Yes.
it's going to become the result when you ask for a certain thing. Do you have any sense of how it's been played up in AI yet? Or
It's all over the internet.
Yeah, it's all
It's
over.
all over the internet.
Yeah.
I mean, and some of them so brazen. I mean, there's a full nude male couple that is so in your face that, anyway, nobody's policing. That's one thing about the internet that, you can get. What happens is, though, that the images do disappear. That's why I asked Anne the question the other day, how she was saving things, because I would like to save some of these. And I have some that are now 10 years old, probably, from the internet.
It's interesting that you referred to the pitchfork as a weapon. I find when I look at American Gothic, the visual center for me is the pitchfork. It is the pitchfork rather than the people. And I'm struck by the fact that it is held upright, because normally a farmer would not hold a pitchfork that way. So I wonder if you've thought about his choice of using a pitchfork as opposed to a shovel or some other farm implement.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. The original idea was a rake. So some of you may have seen it because we have one little drawing for this. Grant Wood didn't save any of his other drawings because he didn't know he was about ready to make something that was, going to get a talk 50 years later. So we only have one little sketch, and it shows the man and woman very much in the pose, but a rake, great big rake with prongs down it, doesn't at all make the impact that a pitchfork does. So somewhere along the line, and we don't know where or how, he changed his mind. And that, of course, helps people say farmer when they see it, because it looks to them like a farm tool. That he holds it, with the blades up is kind of powerful as a visual image, but it makes it more like a portrait. People holding things, or military portrait, or holding your skis if you just won a race or something. You hold them, erect and vertical. So I think for him it was to give it a more hierarchic quality, make the image more formal. It never would have, he wasn't interested in showing it in use. He was showing it rather as an emblem of who the part of the world they come from, basically. She's got it.
Want to see Wanda, thank you. My question is, in your wrap up, you started with a rich series of, would you repeat that part of American Gothic that you were wrapping it up at the end, and you said that it's a rich series of. I know. I'm sorry, it's in there, but it was.
I'll show it to you.
It was beautifully said.
Okay, thank you. I'll show it to you after this, okay? Anything else? Yeah.
Very quickly, 2 comments. You're probably aware of this, but I thought I would mention it. Paul Schweitzer did a show with a significant catalog on the voyage of life and its voyage forward through the end of the 1800s into popular culture, which was very interesting, but very different because there was no computer, Facebook, popular media, but that is something like you that he spent years looking at. The other thought I had in hearing you talk about the iconic nature of this painting is he had 2 well-known but not iconic paintings, The Daughters of the American Revolution and Parson Weems' Fable. Given the 250th anniversary that we're going through, it would be interesting for the museums holding those paintings to re-examine and bring that into their dialogue.
Well, the Daughters of Revolution is in Ohio. It's not Cleveland, it's Cincinnati. And of course, Parson Weems' Fable is at the Amon Carter Museum. Neither one of them is an icon. You know, I mean, that's a nice. So it never took off again to have another quite similar kind. But Daughters of Revolution came as close to having people say, he's finally on to what he should be doing. A lot of Northeasterners thought that's exactly what he should be doing. He should be making fun of his local community, basically. There always was a kind of big tension there between what he felt he was doing and what particularly the kind of art establishment thought he should be doing. Anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a quick question because you're publishing a book. Are you able to use some of those born digital images, or how do you get reproduction rights for things that are so ephemeral? And
It's a miserable journey. I have 240 images, and over 100 of them are takeoffs. And it's not easy. And I can't find many of the makers. So I'm just praying that they'll be complimented about being in the book. But the hard part is you have to get a high-res enough image for your publisher to be happy. So a lot of mine, like I love that one of the pimp and prostitute. I just think that is fabulous, but it's not, I only know it because I grabbed it 10 years ago and I can't find out who did it. And it's not high-res enough, so I can't use it in my book. But that was one of the most miserable processes of the last 8 months I've been through.
Yeah, if I may, I went through similar things as far as image rights, and there is a clause sort of in the copyright law that if the primary use is educational, that the rights of copyright can be waived. So if primarily your publication is of educational nature, you may not have to fight a lot of those battles. That's what I encountered sort of.
I know, but you have to have a lawyer to back you up when somebody, decides they're going to contest.
Yes, yeah.
It's
anyway.
so well organized. Some artists have such well organized rights representatives now.
Right.
And I mean, I can't tell you how many people want money because I'm doing one particular image. And I can't sort out who has the real rights. And so I just pay up, basically. Yeah. I try to talk them down, but it's, I don't know how people do it these days with the kind of costs of time and of money that are involved. I feel for the first bookers. I mean, I was able to raise some money and help myself do the work, but I still had to do a lot of the work myself because I had the contacts and so on. Okay, are we ready for Suzanne? I think. Thank you. Oh, she, I have to get rid of this, actually.